Cowboy saved Shivering native girl in a blizzard. Next day, her father arrived with strange reward. Jack had been riding across the snowy plains for hours. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and the wind cut through his thick coat like tiny knives. Each step of his horse left deep marks in the snow, but even those footprints were soon swallowed by the drifting white powder. He had been traveling alone for days, delivering supplies to remote ranches and helping wherever he could. But this winter had been harsher than he expected. The snowstorms came suddenly and stayed longer, turning familiar paths into white deserts. As he guided his horse through a narrow pass between two hills, Jack noticed something strange ahead. At first, he thought it was a bush bent over by the wind. Then he saw a small movement, a tiny figure struggling against the blizzard. Jack squinted, his eyes watering from the cold. "By the looks of it," he murmured, "that's not an animal." The closer he got, the more he realized it was a little girl. She was bundled in layers of worn clothing, but they offered little protection against the icy wind. Snow had covered her hair and shoulders, and she was shivering so badly that she could barely stand. Jack felt a surge of concern. Out here, alone in this storm, she would not survive long. He slid down from his horse, his boots crunching in the deep snow, and ran toward her. "Hey, hey there! Are you okay?" he called, his voice almost lost to the howling wind. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear and cold. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small choked sound came out. Jack could see her lips were blue, and her tiny hands were shaking so hard they looked like leaves in a storm. Without wasting another second, Jack knelt beside her and gently lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, and he realized she must have been traveling for a long time, with almost nothing to eat. As he wrapped his coat more tightly around her, he whispered, "Don't worry. I've got you. You'll be safe now." He carefully laid her across his horse, keeping her warm against his chest, and climbed up behind her. The wind had grown even stronger. Snowflakes stung Jack's face like tiny needles, and the ground was slippery beneath the horse's hooves. Every step forward was hard, but Jack did not slow down. He knew there was only one place she could be safe: his small cabin, a few miles from the pass. It wasn't much, but it had a fire and blankets, and it would be warm. As they rode, Jack tried to speak to her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The girl only shook her head. Her eyes were wide and scared, and she clutched his coat tightly as if letting go would make her vanish into the storm. Jack understood. She was probably terrified, and the cold had made her too weak to answer. "That's okay," he said. "We'll get you warm first. Then you can tell me anything you want." The horse slipped once, then again, and Jack held her tighter, careful not to let her fall. The blizzard seemed endless, the world around them a blur of white and gray. Trees and rocks appeared and disappeared like ghosts in the storm. Yet Jack pressed on, driven by the thought of keeping her alive. Every mile felt like a lifetime. But he could not give up. He had faced storms before, but never like this, and never with a child's life in his hands. Finally, after what felt like hours, he saw a warm glow in the distance. His cabin. Relief flooded him. He hurried his horse forward, shouting words of encouragement. The girl stirred slightly, but she was still too cold to respond. Jack felt a pang of worry. He needed to get the fire going fast. When he reached the cabin, he quickly dismounted and carried her inside. The warmth hit her instantly, and she let out a small shiver that shook her from head to toe. Jack set her down on a thick blanket in front of the fireplace. He stacked the wood high and struck a match. The fire roared to life, casting shadows across the small cabin walls. Jack wrapped another blanket around her shoulders and rubbed her arms gently to get the blood flowing again. She began to relax, her shivering slowly easing. Jack poured her a small cup of warm water, and she sipped it carefully, still too exhausted to speak. He smiled softly. "There you go. That's better, huh? You're safe now." The girl's eyes flicked up to his, and for a moment Jack thought he saw a hint of a smile. It was tiny, but it gave him hope. Jack looked around the cabin. There were a few supplies: dried meat, flour, some sugar, and a little milk. He decided to make her something warm to eat, even if it was simple. He heated some water and poured it over the dried meat, creating a small stew. The aroma filled the cabin, and the girl's nose twitched as she breathed it in. She reached out for the bowl, and Jack handed it to her carefully. As she ate, Jack kept talking softly, telling her about the land around them. He spoke about the hills, the animals, and the way the snow could make the world look magical if you looked closely. She listened, occasionally nodding or glancing up at him. It was clear she had been alone for a long time, and Jack realized how brave she must be to survive in such harsh conditions. Hours passed, and the girl began to regain some strength. Her lips turned a healthier color, and her shivering slowed. She finally whispered her name, Ayanna. Jack smiled warmly. Ayanna, that's a beautiful name. You're doing so well, little one. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin there was warmth and safety. Jack knew he would have to help her find her family soon, but for now, he focused on keeping her alive and comfortable. He made her another blanket nest near the fire and sat beside her, sharing stories of his own childhood. He told her about riding across the plains, helping neighbors, and the adventures he had faced. Ayanna listened, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion, but also with wonder. As night fell, the wind howled louder, rattling the cabin walls. Jack checked the fire and piled on more wood. He wrapped Ayanna in another layer of blankets and tucked her close. "Sleep now," he whispered. "You've been so brave today. Tomorrow, we'll figure everything out." She rested her head on the blanket and slowly drifted to sleep, the first real rest she had probably had in days. Jack stayed awake for a long time, watching the fire and thinking. He knew the blizzard could last another day or more, and he feared for anyone still out in it. But seeing Ayanna safe gave him hope. He realized that sometimes, in the hardest storms, small acts of courage and kindness could make the biggest difference. By the time Jack finally lay down to rest himself, the wind had calmed slightly. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this night felt different. Saving Ayanna was not just about keeping her alive. It was about showing her that even in the coldest, harshest world, there were people who would care and protect her. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, covering the plains in a soft blanket of white. But inside Jack's cabin, there was warmth, safety, and the quiet beginning of a bond that neither of them would forget. For Ayanna, the night was the first moment she felt hope in days. For Jack, it was a reminder that even a lone cowboy could change someone's life with courage, compassion, and a simple act of kindness. And so, the first night ended, with firelight dancing on the walls, snow piling high outside, and two lives quietly beginning to intertwine, bound by the storm and the shared courage of a cold winter night. The sun barely pierced the thick clouds, casting a pale light over the frozen landscape. Inside Jack's small cabin, the warmth of the fire had chased away the worst of the night's chill, but the wind still howled outside, rattling the wooden walls. Jack had slept only a few hours, waking repeatedly to make sure Ayana was still breathing and warm. She lay bundled under blankets, her small chest rising and falling steadily, and he felt a deep sense of relief. She had survived the night, but the questions of what would happen next weighed heavily on him. Jack moved quietly around the cabin, starting a new fire and checking the supply of wood. He knew he would have to keep the fire going all day if the blizzard returned. Ayana stirred under her blankets, murmuring softly in her sleep, her tiny hands clutched at the edges of the blanket as if holding on to the warmth like a lifeline. Jack couldn't help but smile. She was so small, yet she had already shown incredible strength. The cold, the wind, and the fear of being lost had not broken her spirit. He prepared a simple breakfast of warmed water, a little milk, and some leftover dried meat. He brought it to Ayana carefully, and she opened her eyes, blinking at the light and the warmth. "Good morning," Jack said gently. "Did you sleep well?" Ayana's eyes were still wary, but she nodded slightly. Her voice was weak as she whispered, "Thank you." Jack felt a warmth in his chest that went beyond the fire. For someone so young, she had already endured so much, yet she still had the courage to express gratitude. Jack encouraged her to eat slowly. The little stew warmed her from the inside out, and with each spoonful her strength seemed to return. He talked to her about simple things: the snow outside, the way the wind moved over the plains, and the animals that lived in the forest. Ayana listened quietly, her wide eyes taking in everything. Jack noticed that despite her exhaustion, there was a spark of curiosity and intelligence in her gaze. It reminded him that she was not just a child in need. She was a person with her own thoughts, feelings, and courage. As the morning passed, the storm outside seemed to lessen slightly. The wind still whistled, but the blizzard of the night before had given way to a calm, gentle snowfall. Jack knew that soon he would need to help Ayana find her family, but he also knew it had to be done carefully. They were in unfamiliar territory, and the snow could make tracking difficult. He wanted to make sure she was strong enough to travel and warm enough to withstand the cold. After breakfast, Jack helped Ayana out of the cabin and showed her the small yard. He taught her how to move carefully through the snow, how to step without slipping, and how to watch for hidden ice beneath the fresh snow. She followed his instructions with surprising attentiveness, and Jack was impressed. Despite everything she had gone through, she listened, learned quickly, and tried her best. Her small hands, still red from the cold, held onto his jacket for support. Jack decided they should prepare for the journey to find her family. He wrapped her in extra blankets, tied a scarf around her face, and made sure she had boots and gloves that could keep her feet and hands warm.
"We need to be careful," he told her.
"The snow is still deep, and the plains can be tricky, but we'll get to your family, I promise." Ayana nodded silently, her eyes full of trust. That trust was heavy, but Jack felt proud. She believed he could keep her safe, and he would not let her down. As they moved through the snow toward the tree line in the distance, Jack told her stories to keep her spirits high. He spoke of foxes that outsmarted hunters, of eagles soaring above mountains, and of other travelers who had survived harsh winters. Ayana's small smiles grew with each story, and Jack felt a sense of companionship he had not expected. It was a bond born of necessity, fear, and trust, but it was also genuine. For both of them, this winter's day had become more than survival. It was a lesson in patience, courage, and hope. However, even as the snow fell softly around them, Jack could not ignore the dangers. He knew the plains could be deceptive. A gentle slope could hide a sudden drop. Snow could cover a thin layer of ice over water. He kept a careful eye on the ground and the distant horizon, guiding Ayana with every step. At one point, a sudden gust of wind knocked her almost off balance. Jack caught her immediately, pulling her close and whispering reassurances. "It's okay. You're safe. Just hold on." She clung to him tightly, and for a moment the fear in her eyes mirrored his own. The fear of losing someone in the vast, frozen wilderness. Hours passed as they moved slowly, carefully through the snow. Jack noticed how quiet Ayanna had become, her eyes scanning the horizon. He realized she was thinking, probably wondering if she would ever see her parents again. Her silence spoke volumes. It was not sadness alone. It was resilience, observation, and determination. Jack admired her silently. Children often lost hope quickly, but not Ayanna. She seemed to understand that survival required calm, patience, and trust in those who helped her. By late afternoon, the sky began to clear. The sun peeked faintly through the clouds, reflecting off the snow and casting a pale golden light across the landscape. Jack stopped for a moment and looked around. He could see signs of human life in the distance, smoke rising faintly from a small settlement. "We might be getting close," he said softly, though he knew Ayanna could barely see it yet. Her small hand gripped his tightly, and he felt her trust once more. As they approached a denser line of trees, Jack noticed footprints in the snow, fresh ones, heading in a direction that matched their path. His heart skipped a beat. Could these be her family, or were they other travelers lost in the storm? He slowed his pace, careful not to alarm Ayanna. She looked up at him with wide eyes, sensing that something important was near. He whispered, "Stay close to me, little one. We might be meeting someone soon." Suddenly, a soft voice called out from the distance. Jack's ears perked immediately. "Ayanna?" The voice was familiar, and even through the wind it carried warmth and concern. The little girl's eyes widened and she broke into a small run, guided by instinct. Jack followed, urging her gently, until they reached a small clearing where two figures emerged from the tree line. One was a woman, her face lined with worry, and the other a tall man with sharp, kind eyes. They rushed forward, enveloping Ayanna in a protective embrace. Tears streamed down the woman's face, and Jack could see the relief and gratitude in the father's eyes. For a moment, there was silence. Jack watched as Ayanna clung to her parents, her tiny body trembling not from cold, but from the overwhelming relief of being reunited. He felt a strange mixture of joy and melancholy. He had kept her safe, but now it was time for her to return to her family. He stepped forward, and the father looked at him, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," the man said simply. "You saved my daughter's life." Jack shook his head modestly. "I only did what anyone would have done." But the man's expression made it clear he meant more than words could convey. There was respect there, a silent acknowledgement of bravery, kindness, and honor. Before leaving, the father handed Jack a small object wrapped in cloth. Jack unwrapped it carefully and saw a beautifully carved wooden token. "It is a gift," the father explained, "a sign of our gratitude. It will protect you as you protected her." Jack held it in his hand, feeling the smooth curves and intricate details. It was not gold or silver, but it was priceless in meaning. He nodded, deeply moved. As Ayanna and her family disappeared into the forest, Jack stood silently, watching. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the snow. He felt the cold again, but it was different now. It was not threatening. It was a reminder of the storm they had survived together, of courage in the face of danger, and of the bond that had formed between him and a small girl who had shown more bravery than many adults he had known. Jack returned to his cabin slowly, the wooden token in his pocket. The fire was still warm, and he sat beside it, reflecting on the day. The plains were harsh and unforgiving, yet moments like this made the struggle worthwhile. Ayana's courage, the trust she had given him, and the gratitude of her family had left a mark on him. He realized that sometimes the smallest acts, a hand offered, warmth given, courage shown, could have the greatest impact. Night fell again, peaceful this time, and Jack knew that life on the plains would continue with its challenges. But he also knew that hope, courage, and kindness could guide even the most lost travelers through the storm. He placed the wooden token carefully on his mantle, a symbol of the bond formed that day between a cowboy, a little girl, and her family. The morning after Ayana's reunion with her family, Jack woke to the quiet sound of snowflakes tapping against his cabin window. The storm had passed completely, leaving the plains sparkling under a pale sun. The wind was calm, and the world outside seemed peaceful, almost magical. Yet, Jack felt a restless energy he could not shake. Something told him that the events of the past 2 days were far from over. He dressed quickly and stepped outside, the snow crunching under his boots. The cold was sharp but refreshing, and Jack breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp air. He could see the footprints of Ayana and her family heading toward the distant tree line. For a moment he considered following them to check that they had safely reached the village, but then he hesitated. He was a stranger to them, and his presence might be seen as intrusive. Still, he could not ignore the feeling that today would bring something unexpected. As he walked back toward the cabin, Jack noticed movement in the distance, a horse riding slowly toward him. The figure was tall, wrapped in furs and blankets, moving steadily despite the snow still clinging to the ground. Jack squinted. Could it be someone from Ayana's family? Or perhaps another traveler caught in the storm? The rider drew closer, and Jack's heart beat faster. When the rider finally arrived, he dismounted carefully. He was a tall man with a stern face, deep-set eyes, and an air of quiet authority. Jack immediately recognized him. Ayana's father. But there was something different about him today. His expression was serious, yet there was a glimmer of respect and purpose in his eyes. Jack felt a mixture of curiosity and caution.
"You saved her," the man said, his voice calm but firm.
I owe you more than words can express. He held out his hand, and Jack shook it, feeling the strength in his grip. The father's eyes scanned the cabin, the snow, and finally settled on Jack's face. But this is not just about gratitude, he continued. There is something you must understand about the gift I bring. Jack tilted his head, intrigued. The previous day, the father had given him a small wooden token, a symbol of protection and respect. Could there be more? The man reached into his coat and pulled out another object, wrapped carefully in cloth. He handed it to Jack with a solemn nod. Jack took it gently, unwrapping the cloth with care. Inside was a small pouch, filled with a strange mixture of herbs, stones, and feathers. This, the father said, is a sacred token from our people. It is given only to those who have shown courage, honor, and kindness to our family. It will protect you, guide you, and remind you of the bond formed in the storm. Jack examined the pouch closely. Each item was delicate, but the craftsmanship and care were obvious. He felt a deep respect for the father and his people, understanding that this was more than a simple gift. The father continued, "When a child is in danger, it is not only courage that matters. The heart and intentions of the person who helps are tested. You have proven yourself, and this token is a sign that you are trusted even by those who are strangers." Jack's chest swelled with a mix of pride and humility. He had acted out of instinct, out of a desire to help a child in need. but he realized that his actions had deeper significance to those he had aided. Jack thanked him quietly, feeling the weight of the token in his hand. It was not gold or money, but its value was far greater. It represented trust, respect, and a connection between two worlds. He had crossed paths with Ayanna and her family by chance, but the bond formed in the storm would stay with him forever. The father nodded and mounted his horse. "I will not ask you to come with us. Your path is different, and your journey continues elsewhere. But know this, if ever you find yourself in need, or if someone you care for is in danger, the token will remind you that kindness and courage are never forgotten." He gave Jack a final nod, and with a gentle pull of the reins, he and Ayanna rode toward the forest. Jack watched them disappear, the trees swallowing them into the distance. For a long moment Jack stood silently, the pouch in his hand. The snow sparkled around him, untouched and pure. Yet his thoughts were a whirlwind. The storm, the rescue, and now this sacred token had changed something within him. He realized that the world was larger and stranger than he had imagined, and that even in the harshest conditions, connections could be formed that transcended language, culture, and distance. Jack returned to his cabin and placed the token on the mantel beside the wooden figure from the previous day. He stared at it, tracing the smooth surfaces and delicate feathers. There was a sense of responsibility in holding it, a reminder that courage was not just about facing danger, but about doing what was right even when no one is watching. As the day progressed, Jack prepared for his next journey. The storm had passed, but the plains were still treacherous. The snow was deep, and the cold could be unforgiving. Yet he felt a renewed determination. The events of the past 2 days had changed his perspective. Helping Ayanna had been instinctive, but receiving her father's gift had shown him that small actions could have a profound impact. Jack spent the afternoon repairing his cabin, stacking firewood, and preparing supplies for future travelers he might encounter. He reflected on the lessons he had learned: patience, trust, and the courage to act in difficult situations. Ayanna's bravery and the father's wisdom were etched into his memory, shaping the way he viewed the world. As evening approached, Jack stepped outside once more. The snow-covered plains stretched endlessly in every direction, quiet and still under the soft light of the setting sun. He thought about Ayanna, about the storm, and about the bond that had formed between them. It was a bond not built on words or promises, but on shared experience and mutual trust. Jack knew that life on the plains would continue to test him. There would be storms, dangers, and challenges that demanded courage and quick thinking. But he felt ready, strengthened by the events of the past days. He had learned that heroism was not about recognition or reward, but about taking responsibility for the safety and well-being of others, no matter the risk. That night, Jack sat by the fire, the token glowing softly in the firelight. He thought about the future, about the people he might help, and about the stories yet to be told. The snow fell quietly outside, a reminder that life could be harsh and unpredictable. Yet inside the cabin there was warmth, hope, and the knowledge that acts of courage and kindness could create ripples far beyond their immediate moment. As Jack drifted to sleep, he felt a sense of peace he had rarely known. The storm had tested him, challenged him, and rewarded him in ways he could not have imagined. He had saved a child, earned the trust of a family, and received a gift that symbolized something far greater than gold or treasure. It was a gift of connection, respect, and a reminder that even in the coldest, harshest world, courage and kindness could light the way. And so the turning point of his journey had arrived. Jack realized that life on the plains was not just about survival, but about the choices one made, the risks one took, and the hearts one touched. Ayana's story would remain with him forever, a reminder that even a single act of bravery could change the course of someone's life. The night deepened and the fire burned low. Jack held the token in his hand, feeling the weight of its significance. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that he was ready. The storm had revealed not only the fragility of life, but the strength of the human spirit, and Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. As sleep finally claimed him, the snow outside whispered softly in the quiet night, a gentle reminder that even in the harshest conditions, there was beauty, there was hope, and there was the chance to make a difference. Jack's journey was far from over, but he faced the future with courage, guided by the memory of a little girl, her family, and the strange, sacred reward that had changed his life forever. The next day, the sun rose over the plains with a soft glow, casting long shadows over the fresh snow. Jack woke early, as he always did, listening to the quiet whisper of the wind outside. The world seemed peaceful, almost perfect. But Jack knew better. Life on the plains was never truly calm. The past days had reminded him how quickly things could change, and he remained alert, ready for anything. Jack dressed quickly, layering his coat and scarf against the cold. He checked the token once more, running his fingers over its smooth surfaces. It was strange how such a small object could carry so much meaning. He felt a sense of courage whenever he touched it, as if it was reminding him of what he was capable of the responsibility that came with helping others. Today, he felt that responsibility strongly, though he did not yet know why. As he stepped outside, he noticed movement at the edge of the forest. A figure approached, mounted on a horse. The tall man, Ayana's father, was riding steadily, his eyes fixed on Jack. There was no fear or anger in his expression, but there was an intensity Jack could not ignore. Something important had brought him here, and Jack's curiosity mixed with a quiet apprehension. When the man reached the cabin, he dismounted carefully, his boots sinking into the soft snow. "Jack," he said simply, his voice calm but firm, "I have returned to offer something more than thanks. There is a matter of trust, and you have earned it." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had already received a token of gratitude, a sacred gift, but the man's words hinted at something deeper, something he could not yet understand. The father reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden chest, carved with intricate designs. He placed it carefully in front of Jack. "This," he said, "is for you. It is not gold, nor silver, nor any treasure you might seek. It is a symbol, a reminder, and a test." Jack looked at the chest, examining it closely. The wood was smooth, polished by hand, and the carving seemed to tell a story of courage, family, and survival. Jack opened the chest carefully, expecting perhaps another token, and found a collection of items inside. There were small feathers, stones, and tiny carved figures, each one delicate and full of meaning. The father explained, "These items represent different qualities: courage, patience, wisdom, and trust. By accepting them, you are agreeing to carry these qualities into your life. They will guide you, and they will remind you of the bond formed between our families in the storm." Jack felt a mix of awe and humility. He had acted out of instinct, saving Ayana without expecting anything in return. Yet now he realized that his actions had created something far greater than a simple rescue. They had built a connection, a trust, and a lesson about human kindness. The chest was not just a gift. It was a symbol of everything he had done and everything he could still do. The father looked at Jack intently. "There is more," he said. "Not everyone can act with courage when faced with danger. You did not hesitate, even when the storm was harsh and the path uncertain. That is why we give you this reward, to remind you that bravery and kindness are remembered. Jack nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the moment. It was not about recognition or reward. It was about the values he carried and how they would guide him in the future. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet, a distant cry carried by the wind. Jack's heart leapt. He knew immediately it was a call for help. The father's eyes narrowed, and without hesitation, Jack grabbed his coat and ran toward the sound. The wind had picked up again, blowing snow into thick clouds that made it hard to see. Jack called out, listening carefully. Another cry reached him, closer, more urgent. He raced through the snow, following the sound, his boots sinking deep with each step. The plains seemed endless, but Jack pushed forward, driven by instinct and the lessons of the past days. As he approached a small ravine, he saw a figure trapped in the snow. A young boy, struggling to free himself from a drift that had collapsed over him. The boy was terrified, his face pale from the cold, and he could barely move. Jack did not hesitate. He dropped to his knees and dug through the snow, pulling the boy free. The child shivered violently, and Jack wrapped him in his coat, shielding him from the wind. "It's okay," he said firmly. "You're safe now. I've got you." The boy clung to him, relief and fear mixing in his eyes. Jack felt a surge of emotion. The storm, the rescue of Ayanna, and now this boy. It was all connected. The plains were harsh, but courage and care could make all the difference. Jack led the boy back toward the cabin, where the father had arrived to help guide them safely. As they walked, the father explained, "Life on the plains tests everyone. Not everyone survives without help. Today you showed that the lessons of kindness and bravery are not just for yourself. You have extended them to another, just as you did before." Jack realized the truth in the words, the storm, the rescues, the gifts. They were all part of a greater lesson about responsibility, courage, and the bonds formed between people. When they reached the cabin, the boy was safe and warm by the fire. He looked at Jack with wide, grateful eyes, and Jack felt the familiar warmth of relief. It was a powerful moment, a reminder that bravery was not just about facing danger, but about acting for the sake of others, even when the odds seemed impossible. The father watched silently, nodding in approval. Jack sat by the fire, the chest and its tokens before him. He reflected on the past days, the blizzard, the rescue of Ayanna, the bond with her family, and now saving another child. Each act of courage had led to the next, each moment building on the last. He understood now that heroism was not a single event, but a series of choices, made with care, attention, and respect for life. The boy, now warm and resting, spoke softly to Jack. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling but sincere. Jack smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We all help each other. That's how people survive, and that's how we show kindness." The boy nodded, and for a moment, Jack saw a reflection of Ayanna in his eyes, the bravery, the trust, and the resilience that children possess even in the harshest conditions. The father placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You have passed the test," he said. "Not of skill, not of strength, but of heart. These plains are unforgiving, yet you have shown that courage and compassion can overcome even the fiercest storm."
Jack felt a deep sense of pride, tempered with humility.
He knew that the storm had not changed him physically, but it had shaped him in ways he could not have imagined. As night fell, the cabin glowed with the warmth of the fire and the soft light of the setting sun reflecting off the snow outside. Jack looked at the chest, the tokens, and the boy sleeping peacefully. He realized that the events of these days had created a story of human connection, trust, and courage. The storm had tested him, but it had also shown him the strength of kindness and the impact one person could have on the lives of others. Jack felt a deep calm settle over him. The storm outside was gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful night. Yet the lessons and the bonds formed would remain forever. Courage, kindness, and respect were more than words. They were actions, moments of decision, and the willingness to face fear for the sake of another. The father's gift, the boy's gratitude, and the memory of Ayanna all combined into a powerful realization. Bravery is not measured by fame or reward, but by the difference it makes in the lives of others. As he finally prepared to rest, Jack held the token close. It was no longer just a gift. It was a reminder of the storm, the rescues, and the bonds that had formed in its midst. The snow fell gently outside, covering the plains in a soft blanket. But Jack knew that the warmth of courage and compassion would shine far longer than any winter sun. The climax of the storm had passed, but its lessons remained. Jack understood that every choice mattered. Every act of kindness rippled outward, and every moment of courage could change lives in ways no one could predict. He had faced the blizzard, saved lives, and earned the trust of those he had helped. And in doing so, he had discovered the true meaning of bravery, compassion, and human connection. Night enveloped the plains, quiet and still, but the fire inside Jack's cabin burned bright. He smiled, feeling the presence of those he had helped, and the knowledge that the storm, though harsh and dangerous, had also revealed the best in him and in others. Courage, kindness, and respect, these were the treasures the storm had given him, and he would carry them always. The next morning, Jack woke to a world transformed. Overnight, the wind had stopped, and the snow-covered plains glistened under a clear sky. The sunlight reflected off the snow, making the whole world look like a sparkling white sea. Jack stepped outside his cabin, taking a deep breath of the crisp air. There was a calmness now that had not existed during the storm, a stillness that felt both peaceful and reflective. Inside, the fire from the night before had burned down to glowing embers. Jack checked the wooden chest the father had given him. He touched the small carved figures, the feathers, and the stones, feeling the weight of each item and the meaning behind it. These tokens were more than simple objects. They were reminders of courage, kindness, and the bonds formed in unexpected moments. He realized that the past few days had changed him in ways he had never anticipated. He remembered the little girl, Ayanna, and her brave eyes as she had faced the blizzard, her father's solemn gaze, her mother's tears of relief, the boy he had rescued just yesterday. All of it lingered in his mind like a vivid tapestry. The plains could be harsh and unforgiving, but the people he had encountered showed him that strength and trust were never far away. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for himself, but for the chance to help, to witness courage, and to be part of something greater than his own life. Jack knew he had to continue his journey across the plains, delivering supplies, helping those in need, and facing the challenges that came with living in this vast and unpredictable land. Yet, he now carried something far more valuable than provisions or tools. He carried experience, wisdom, and the quiet knowledge that a single act of courage could ripple through the lives of many. As he prepared to leave the cabin, he thought about the boy he had saved and the gift from Ayanna's father. Jack realized that these moments were teaching him lessons about responsibility and humanity. Life on the plains was not just about survival. It was about connection, trust, and the choices one made when faced with danger. Even a small act of bravery, done without thought for reward, could leave a lasting mark on the world. Before he mounted his horse, Jack took one last look at the cabin and the sparkling snow around it. He imagined Diana walking through the forest with her family, safe and warm, her father holding her hand. He hoped that she would remember the kindness he had shown her, just as he would remember her courage. Their brief encounter had been life-changing for both of them, a reminder that even strangers could form bonds strong enough to withstand storms and hardship. Jack rode slowly, letting the snow crunch beneath his horse's hooves, reflecting on everything that had happened. The plains stretched endlessly, but the memory of the events, the storm, the rescue, the gifts, and the trust placed in him made the distance feel less lonely. He thought about the lessons of bravery, compassion, and patience. They were not abstract ideas, but living truths that guided every decision he would make from that moment forward. As he moved through a narrow valley, Jack noticed the footprints left by other travelers. Some were fresh, while others had faded under the drifting snow. He realized that he was part of a larger story, a world filled with people struggling, surviving, and showing courage in ways both big and small. Each footprint told a story, and each act of kindness left its own mark. He felt humbled and inspired by the thought that even in a vast, harsh world, human connection could create warmth, hope, and safety. Jack paused on a small hill to survey the plains. The sunlight sparkled on distant trees and hills, and he could see the horizon stretching endlessly. For a moment he felt the weight of solitude, knowing that the life of a cowboy was often lonely. Yet, the events of the past days had shown him that he was never truly alone. Trust, bravery, and compassion connected him to others in ways that transcended distance, culture, and circumstance. As he rode on, Jack thought about the wooden chest and the sacred tokens inside. Each one was a reminder that courage was not about strength alone, but about the heart and intentions behind each action. The feathers symbolized vigilance, the stones represented resilience, and the carved figures reminded him of guidance and wisdom. Together they formed a compass for life, guiding him not only across the snowy plains but through every challenge he would face. Later that day, Jack encountered another traveler on the trail, a young woman struggling to lead her pack of horses through the snow. She was exhausted, and the horses were tired and hungry. Jack approached her carefully, offering help. "Need a hand?" he asked. She looked up, relief flooding her eyes.
"Yes, please."
Together they led the horses to a sheltered spot and fed them. The small act reminded Jack that courage and kindness were not limited to dramatic rescues. They were in the daily choices to help others, to share strength, and to offer support when it was most needed. As the sun began to set, Jack found a quiet spot to camp for the night. He set up a small fire, warming himself and preparing a simple meal. The snow glowed pink and gold under the fading light, creating a magical landscape. He thought about the boy, Ayana, her family, and the young woman he had just helped.
Each person represented a connection, a story, and a lesson that Jack carried with him.
The storm had been harsh, but it had also revealed the beauty of human courage and compassion. That night, as Jack lay near the fire, he reflected on the past week. The blizzard had tested him physically, mentally, and emotionally. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and exhaustion. Yet through it all, he had learned that bravery was not about seeking glory or recognition. It was about taking responsibility for others, acting with kindness, and showing courage when it mattered most. The gifts from Ayana's father, the trust of those he had saved, and the gratitude he had received were not rewards in the traditional sense. They were reminders of the goodness that existed in people and the potential for connection, even in the harshest conditions. Jack gazed at the stars above, the clear night sky stretching endlessly over the plains. Each star seemed to twinkle with a quiet message, a reminder that life was fragile, precious, and interconnected. He thought about the paths of those he had helped, and how their lives might be forever shaped by the choices he had made. The realization filled him with a sense of purpose. Courage, kindness, and compassion were not just actions, they were legacies, shaping the world in ways he could not always see. As sleep began to take him, Jack felt a deep calm. The storm, the rescues, and the gifts from Ayana's father had all taught him valuable lessons. He understood that life was unpredictable, that danger could appear suddenly, and that the harshest conditions could reveal the best in people. The plains would continue to test him, but he was ready. He carried not only supplies and tools, but also the wisdom, courage, and compassion that would guide him through any challenge. The next morning, Jack packed his camp and mounted his horse. The plains stretched endlessly, glimmering in the new light of dawn. He rode with purpose, knowing that he would encounter others in need, and that every choice he made could have lasting consequences. Yet, he felt confident and calm, guided by the lessons he had learned from the storm, the rescues, and the sacred gifts. Jack thought once more of Ayana and her family. He hoped she would grow up remembering the courage and kindness they had shared. He hoped she would carry the lessons of trust, bravery, and compassion into her own life, and he realized that, in some ways, the storm had connected them forever, a brief but profound encounter that left a permanent mark on both their lives. As he rode farther into the plains, the wind gentle and the snow sparkling, Jack understood that the true reward of the storm was not the tokens or recognition, but the knowledge that his actions had made a difference. Courage and kindness, he realized, were treasures far greater than gold, and the bonds formed through them were lasting and unbreakable. The sun rose higher, casting warm light across the plains, and Jack rode on, carrying not only supplies for the people he would meet, but also the lessons of courage, trust, and compassion that would guide him for the rest of his life. The blizzard had passed, but its impact remained, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human heart could shine brightly, illuminating the path for others and creating a legacy of bravery and kindness that could never be forgotten. Jack looked to the horizon, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, yet he had acted with courage and compassion. He had helped Ayana, saved the boy, earned the trust of a family, and learned that even the smallest acts could create ripples of hope. The plains stretched before him, vast and challenging, but Jack knew he was ready. He carried the storm within him, not as a memory of fear, but as a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The morning after the storm had completely passed, Jack woke to a world that seemed almost magical. The plains were covered in a soft blanket of snow, glittering in the early sunlight. Every tree, hill, and rock sparkled as if dusted with tiny diamonds. The wind had calmed, leaving the air crisp and quiet. Jack stepped outside his cabin and took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold, clean air. There was a peacefulness that had not existed during the blizzard, yet Jack felt a sense of restlessness, as if something important was still waiting for him. Inside his cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the warmth from the previous night lingered in the small room. Jack looked at the wooden chest and the sacred tokens that Ayana's father had given him. Each item, the feathers, the carved figures, the stones, carried meaning, and Jack could feel it in his hands. These were not just gifts. They were reminders of courage, trust, patience, and kindness. They were symbols of lessons he had learned through danger, hardship, and connection. Jack thought about Ayana, the little girl he had saved during the blizzard. He remembered the fear and exhaustion in her eyes when he first found her, and the tiny, almost imperceptible smile she had given him when the fire finally warmed her. He thought about her parents, their expressions of gratitude, and the trust they had placed in him in those tense and uncertain moments. Jack realized that the storm had connected him to them in a way he had never expected, forming bonds that went beyond words. He thought, too, about the boy he had rescued the day after Ayana's return to her family. The child had been trapped in a snowdrift, frightened and cold, yet alive because Jack had acted without hesitation. The boy's grateful eyes and trembling voice had left a mark on him, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, small acts of courage could change lives. Jack understood now that the story of the storm was not just about danger, snow, or survival. It was about people, connection, and the choices one made in the face of fear. After a simple breakfast, Jack packed his supplies carefully. The plains were vast, and there were people who might need help along the way. He loaded his horse with what he could carry, making sure that blankets, food, and essential tools were secured. As he prepared to leave, he ran his fingers over the wooden chest and the tokens inside. They had become more than symbols. They were guides, offering quiet lessons about life, courage, and the responsibility one had toward others. Jack mounted his horse and paused for a moment to take in the view. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, glimmering under the sun. The footprints of Ayana and her family were long gone, disappearing into the trees, but the memory of them stayed with him. He hoped that she would remember the courage she had shown and the kindness that had been extended to her. More than that, he hoped that she would carry those lessons into her own life, growing up to help others in ways she had already been helped. As he rode, Jack noticed other travelers on the snow-covered paths. Some were carrying supplies, while others appeared to be seeking shelter or guidance. Jack stopped whenever he could, offering assistance when needed. He helped an elderly man adjust his sled, guided a family safely through a tricky patch of ice, and shared food with a child shivering in the cold. Each encounter reminded him that courage and kindness were not limited to dramatic rescues. They were in the everyday decisions to help others, to act with care, and to offer support. By midday, Jack reached a hill that overlooked a wide valley. He paused to rest and to reflect. The valley below glimmered under the sun, and he could see the tracks of animals, travelers, and the faint remnants of the storm's power in the snowdrifts. Jack realized that the plains were a living story, full of struggles, survival, and small victories. Each person, each animal, and each action was part of that story, just as he had become part of Ayana's story. Jack pulled the wooden chest from his pack and opened it carefully. He ran his fingers over the smooth feathers, the carved figures, and the polished stones. Each one reminded him of lessons learned. The feathers symbolized vigilance and awareness, the stones resilience and patience, and the carved figures wisdom and guidance. He realized that these qualities were not just for survival in the snow or for emergencies. They were lessons to guide him through life, through every challenge he would face. As he prepared to continue his journey, a soft wind carried a distant sound to his ears. At first he thought it was just the echo of the plains, but then he heard it clearly, a faint call for help. Jack's heart tightened, and he urged his horse forward, following the sound. The snow had softened in some areas, and patches of ice glimmered dangerously, but Jack moved carefully, guided by instinct and experience. The cries grew louder, urgent, and desperate, and Jack's determination strengthened. Soon, he came upon a small ravine where a young girl had slipped and was trapped between rocks and snow. Her scarf had come loose, and her small hands were red and numb. Jack acted immediately, digging through the snow to free her and offering words of reassurance. "It's okay," he said firmly. "I've got you now."
"You're safe," The girl clung to him, shivering, but trust filled her eyes.
Jack wrapped her in a thick blanket and helped her to his horse, careful to keep her warm and calm. As they reached a safer area, the girl's parents arrived, drawn by her cries. Their relief was visible, their gratitude deep. They thanked Jack repeatedly, but he only smiled and said, "I'm just glad she's safe. That's all that matters." The father, noticing the wooden chest in Jack's pack, nodded with understanding. "Courage and kindness are rare," he said softly. "Your heart has guided you well." Jack felt a warmth in his chest. It was not recognition he sought, but the knowledge that his actions had made a real difference in someone's life. Jack continued on his journey as the day wore on. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the plains. He thought about the events of the past days, the blizzard, Ayanna, her family, the boy, and now this young girl. Each incident had taught him something new, about patience, about trust, and about the power of human connection. He realized that life was made of choices, and each choice, no matter how small, could have a lasting impact. By evening, Jack found a small, sheltered spot to camp. He built a fire and prepared a simple meal. As he sat near the flames, he reflected on the lessons of courage, compassion, and trust. He understood that heroism was not about seeking recognition, gold, or fame. It was about doing what was right, protecting those in need, and showing kindness even when no one was watching. The sacred tokens in the wooden chest reminded him of this truth. Jack looked out over the plains as the stars began to appear in the sky. The snow glimmered under the moonlight, and the quiet of the night was peaceful. He thought about Ayanna and the boy, and the many travelers he might encounter in the future. Every person had a story, every life had value, and every act of courage created ripples that could change the world. The storm had passed, but its lessons stayed with him, deep in his heart. As he prepared to sleep, Jack held one of the carved figures from the chest in his hand. He thought about the bond formed with Ayanna, her family, and the boy he had saved. The plains were vast and often harsh, but kindness and bravery could light the darkest paths. Jack realized that the world was full of opportunities to help, to protect, and to inspire. Each day was a chance to make a difference, and he would carry that knowledge forward. The night passed quietly, and Jack awoke with renewed determination. He packed his belongings, secured his horse, and set off across the plains once more. The snow sparkled under the bright sun, and the air was crisp and clean. Jack felt a sense of purpose guiding him, a quiet confidence that the choices he made could leave a lasting impact. Courage, kindness, and trust were now not just lessons, but guiding principles that would shape every journey he undertook. As Jack rode farther, he thought once more about the storm and the people whose lives he had touched. He hoped that Ayanna, the boy, and the others he had helped would carry the lessons of bravery and compassion with them. He understood that life was full of challenges, but also full of opportunities to make a difference. The storm had been harsh, the snow treacherous, and the journey exhausting, but it had revealed the best of human courage and the power of kindness. The plains stretched endlessly before him, beautiful and unforgiving. Jack rode on with determination, carrying not only supplies but the wisdom, courage, and compassion he had gained. The storm had passed, but its impact remained, a reminder that even in the coldest, harshest conditions, the human heart could shine brightly, lighting the way for others.